Racist cop grabs black woman at luxury store, but her response? You just messed with the wrong woman. Samantha Greene stood at the counter of the luxury store, trying to ignore the sharp stares from the shoppers and the creeping tension she had come to know all too well. The boutique's air was thick with the scent of overpriced perfume and unspoken judgments. Samantha's fingers traced the edge of her platinum credit card, a small act of defiance against the whispers and sidelong glances. She had just closed a multi-million-dollar deal, her company's stock soaring to new heights. The Cartier watch on her wrist and the Hermes bag at her feet were testaments to her success, yet they seemed to only heighten the suspicion around her. The saleswoman behind the counter plastered on a smile that didn't reach her eyes, her gaze flicking between Samantha's face and the security guard hovering nearby. Will that be all, ma'am? The saleswoman's voice was saccharine, laced with an undercurrent of doubt. Samantha nodded, her posture impeccable, her expression unreadable. Yes, thank you. As the transaction processed, Samantha allowed herself a moment of reflection. The weight of being a black woman in spaces like these never truly lifted, no matter how high she climbed. She had shattered glass ceilings, navigated boardrooms full of skeptical white faces, and built an empire from the ground up. Yet here she stood, feeling like an intruder in a world that should have welcomed her with open arms. The chime of the door opening barely registered until a hush fell over the store. Samantha turned, her eyes meeting those of Officer Derek Hayes. The policeman's weathered face was set in hard lines, his hand resting casually on his holster as he strode towards her, flanked by the store's security. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step away from the counter, Officer Hayes said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Samantha's spine stiffened, but her voice remained calm. Is there a problem, officer? Hayes' eyes narrowed. We receive a call about suspicious activity. I'm going to need to see some identification and proof of purchase for those items. The air in the store grew heavy, charged with unspoken accusations. Samantha felt the familiar burn of injustice rising in her chest, but she kept her composure. Officer, I've been shopping here for years. I'm in the middle of a legitimate transaction. What exactly is suspicious about my presence here? The store manager appeared, hovering at the edge of the confrontation like a spectator at a car crash. His eyes darted between Samantha and Officer Hayes, unwilling to intervene, but clearly uncomfortable with the situation unfolding in his pristine showroom. Officer Hayes took a step closer, his bulk imposing. Ma'am, if you can't provide identification, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises. Samantha stood her ground, her voice low but firm. I will not be leaving. I have every right to be here, and I demand to know on what grounds you're questioning me. The tension in the room ratcheted up a notch. Other shoppers had stopped pretending to browse, their phones out, recording the scene. Samantha could see the fear and sympathy in some eyes, the smug satisfaction in others. She had been here before, caught in the crosshairs of someone else's prejudice, but this time felt different. This time, she refused to back down. Officer Hayes reached for her arm. Ma'am, if you don't cooperate. Samantha jerked back, her voice rising. Do not touch me. This is a clear case of racial profiling, and I will not be manhandled or intimidated. The physical contact sent a ripple through the onlookers. Murmurs grew louder, and more phones appeared, capturing every moment of the escalating confrontation. I want to speak to the manager, Samantha demanded, her gaze locked on Officer Hayes. And I want this officer's actions documented. Now! The store manager finally stepped forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Please, let's all calm down. I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding, Samantha cut in, is the assumption that I don't belong here. I've spent thousands of dollars in this store, and this is how I'm treated? Officer Hayes' face flushed red, his jaw clenching. Ma'am, final warning. Either show me some ID or... The sudden screech of tires outside cut him off. Two black SUVs pulled up to the curb, their tinted windows reflecting the boutique's gleaming facade. The store fell silent as the doors opened and a team of men in crisp suits emerged, led by a tall, imposing figure. Tyler Brooks strode into the store, his presence immediately commanding attention. He moved with the fluid grace of a predator, his eyes scanning the room before settling on Samantha and Officer Hayes. Is there a problem here? Brooks' voice was calm, but there was steel beneath the surface. Officer Hayes turned, his hand instinctively moving towards his weapon. This doesn't concern you, sir. Please step back. Brooks reached into his jacket, producing a badge and ID. Tyler Brooks, head of security for Greene Technologies. I believe it does concern me, as you appear to be harassing my client. The revelation sent shockwaves through the store. Whispers of Greene Technologies and CEO rippled through the crowd. Officer Hayes blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. Your client, he stammered. Brooks nodded, his expression neutral. Ms. Samantha Greene, CEO of Greene Technologies. One of this store's top clients, I might add. Now, would you care to explain why you're accosting her? Officer Hayes' composure cracked. We received reports of suspicious behavior. Suspicious behavior, Brooks repeated, his tone dripping with skepticism. And what exactly constituted this suspicious behavior? Because from where I'm standing, it looks an awful lot like shopping while black. The store manager stepped forward again, his face pale. There must be some mistake. Ms. Greene is, of course, always welcome here. Samantha raised a hand, silencing him. Save it. I've heard enough excuses. What I want now is accountability. She turned to Officer Hayes, her voice steady and clear. You targeted me based on nothing but the color of my skin. You attempted to physically remove me from a store where I was making a legitimate purchase. This ends now. Brooks produced a phone, showing it to Officer Hayes. We've been monitoring Ms. Greene's movements as part of our security protocol. We have footage of this entire incident, which has already been sent to our legal team. I suggest you think very carefully about your next move, officer. The color drained from Hayes' face as the reality of the situation sank in. He looked around, seeing the sea of camera phones pointed at him, the mixture of shock and disgust on the faces of the onlookers. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed his features. I was just responding to a call, he said weakly. And in responding to that call, you revealed your own biases, Samantha replied. This isn't over, Officer Hayes. Not by a long shot. As if on cue, a woman in a sharp suit entered the store, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She approached Samantha, ignoring the stunned faces around her. Ms. Greene, I'm here representing your legal team. We're prepared to file formal charges for racial profiling and unlawful detainment. Officer Hayes took a step back, the gravity of his actions finally hitting home. The store manager rushed forward, his words tumbling out in a panic. Ms. Greene, please, we value your business. This is all a terrible misunderstanding. Samantha held up a hand, silencing him once more. Her voice was ice. Save your apologies. They mean nothing without action. You stood by and watched as I was harassed in your store. Your silence was complicity. She turned to address the room at large, her voice carrying to every corner. This ends today, not just for me, but for every person who's ever been made to feel less than because of the color of their skin. I have the means and the platform to fight this, and I intend to use them. The store was silent, the air heavy with the weight of her words. Samantha nodded to Brooks and her lawyer, then walked towards the exit, her head held high. As she passed Officer Hayes, she paused, meeting his gaze. You chose the wrong person to profile today, officer. But in doing so, you may have just helped spark the change we so desperately need. With that, Samantha Greene stepped out into the sunlight, leaving behind a store full of shocked faces and the beginnings of a storm that would shake the foundations of systemic racism. The black SUVs pulled away from the curb, carrying with them a woman who had turned a moment of injustice into a catalyst for change. As the vehicles disappeared into the city traffic, the whispers inside the store grew to a crescendo. Phones buzzed with notifications as the video of the confrontation began to spread like wildfire across social media. In the coming days, the incident would become a rallying cry, a stark reminder of the prejudices that still lurked beneath the surface of society. And at the center of it all was Samantha Greene, a woman who had faced down discrimination her entire life and emerged stronger for it. She sat in the back of the SUV, her mind already racing with plans for the battle ahead. This wasn't just about one incident in a luxury store. It was about dismantling the systems that allowed such incidents to occur in the first place. As the city skyline rolled by outside her window, Samantha allowed herself a small smile. They had chosen the wrong woman to underestimate, and now they would face the consequences. The real work was just beginning, and Samantha Greene was more than ready for the fight. Tyler Brooks stood like a sentinel, his presence transforming the atmosphere of the boutique. The air crackled with tension as he locked eyes with Officer Hayes, who seemed to shrink under the security chief's steady gaze. "Ms. Greene," Brooks said, his voice calm but authoritative, "are you all right?" Samantha nodded, her composure regained. "I'm fine, Tyler. Thank you for your prompt arrival." Officer Hayes shifted his weight, his earlier bravado evaporating. "Look, there's been a misunderstanding. We received a call about suspicious behavior." Brooks interrupted, his tone sharp. "And what exactly constituted this suspicion? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like racial profiling, plain and simple." The store manager, who had been hovering at the edges of the confrontation, stepped forward. His face was pale, beads of sweat forming on his brow. "Please, let's all calm down. I'm sure we can resolve this amicably." Samantha turned to the manager, her eyes flashing. "Amicably? Where was this desire for amicable resolution when I was being harassed in your store?" The manager flinched, words failing him. Officer Hayes, sensing the tide turning against him, attempted to regain control of the situation. "Now hold on just a minute. I was responding to a call, doing my job. You can't just— Your job." Samantha's voice cut through the air like a whip. "Your job is to protect and serve, not to intimidate and profile innocent citizens based on the color of their skin." Brooks produced a sleek tablet from his jacket. "Officer Hayes, perhaps you'd like to review the footage of Ms. Greene's time in the store. Our security team has been monitoring her movements as part of our standard protocol." He tapped the screen and crystal-clear video began to play, showing Samantha entering the store, browsing, and making her way to the counter. There was nothing remotely suspicious about her behavior. Officer Hayes' face reddened, a mix of embarrassment and anger clouding his features. "That doesn't change the fact that we received a call." "A call based on what?" Brooks pressed. "Because this footage clearly shows that Ms. Greene did nothing to warrant suspicion. So, I have to wonder, what was it about her presence that prompted someone to make that call?" The implication hung heavy in the air. Several onlookers, who had been silently recording the encounter on their phones, began to murmur among themselves. One woman, dressed in designer clothes and dripping with jewelry, stepped forward. "She didn't do anything wrong," the woman said, her voice trembling slightly. "I've been here the whole time. I saw everything." Officer Hayes' jaw clenched, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape route. "Look, I was just following procedure. If there's been a mistake—" "A mistake?" Samantha's voice was cold. "Is that what we're calling racial profiling now? A mistake?" More voices joined the chorus, other shoppers stepping forward to corroborate Samantha's innocence. The tide of public opinion in the store had shifted dramatically, leaving Officer Hayes increasingly isolated. Sensing the change, Hayes attempted to make a hasty exit. "Well, if there's nothing else, I'll just be on my way." Brooks smoothly stepped in front of him, blocking his path. "Not so fast, officer. Our legal team has already been notified. The footage of this incident has been sent to them, and I believe they'll have some questions for you and your department." Hayes' face paled. "You can't be serious. This is ridiculous." "What's ridiculous?" Samantha interjected. "Is that in 2023, I can still be treated like a criminal for the simple act of shopping while black." The store manager, seeing the situation spiraling out of control, made another attempt to salvage the situation. "Ms. Greene, please, we value your business. This is all a terrible misunderstanding. Perhaps we could offer you a discount on your purchases today." Samantha fixed him with a withering stare. "You think you can buy your way out of this? Your silence during this entire ordeal speaks volumes. You're as complicit in this as Officer Hayes." As if on cue, the boutique's door swung open, and a sharp-dressed woman strode in, her heels clicking authoritatively on the marble floor. She made her way directly to Samantha, ignoring the stunned faces around her. "Ms. Green," she said, her voice crisp and professional. "I'm Catherine Lawson from your legal team. We're prepared to file formal charges for racial profiling and unlawful detainment." Officer Hayes' face drained of all color. "Charges? Now wait just a minute. Save it for the court." Officer Hayes, Lawson cut him off. "Your actions today have opened you and your department up to a significant lawsuit. I suggest you contact your union representative immediately." The store manager, now in full panic mode, rushed forward. "Ms. Green, please, we can work this out. We'll make a donation to a charity of your choice. Offer you lifetime VIP status. Anything." Samantha held up a hand, silencing him. "Your apologies and offers mean nothing without real action. You allowed this to happen in your store. Your inaction was as harmful as Officer Hayes' actions." She turned to address the room at large, her voice carrying to every corner. "This ends today, not just for me, but for every person who's ever been made to feel less than because of the color of their skin. I have the means and the platform to fight this, and I intend to use them to their fullest extent." The store fell silent, the weight of her words settling over everyone present. Officer Hayes, his earlier bravado completely evaporated, looked shell-shocked. The reality of what he had done and the consequences he now faced seemed to be sinking in. I didn't mean," he stammered, but the words died on his lips. Samantha regarded him coolly. "Intent doesn't negate impact, Officer Hayes. Your actions today have consequences, not just for you, but for the entire system that allows this kind of profiling to persist." As she spoke, the unmistakable sound of news vans pulling up outside filtered into the store. The incident, it seemed, had already caught the attention of the media. Brooks leaned in close to Samantha. "Ms. Green, we should consider moving you to a more secure location. This is about to become a media circus." Samantha nodded, then turned back to Officer Hayes and the store manager. "Gentlemen, I suggest you prepare yourselves. This story is about to go national, and I assure you, I will be using every resource at my disposal to ensure that what happened here today never happens to anyone else." With that, she turned on her heel and strode towards the exit, flanked by Brooks and Lawson. As they reached the door, a barrage of camera flashes greeted them, along with a chorus of shouted questions from reporters. Samantha paused for a moment, then turned back to face the store one last time. Officer Hayes stood rooted to the spot, his face a mask of confusion and dawning horror. The store manager hovered nearby, wringing his hands nervously. "Remember this moment," Samantha said, her voice carrying over the growing clamor outside. "Because from here on out, nothing will be the same." With those parting words, she stepped out into the fray of reporters, her head held high. The black SUVs were waiting, doors open, ready to whisk her away from the chaos. As they pulled away from the curb, Samantha allowed herself a moment to breathe. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, leaving her feeling drained but determined. "Tyler," she said, turning to her head of security, "I want every second of footage from that store, and I want a full background check on Officer Hayes. If he's done this before, I want to know about it." Brooks nodded, already tapping away on his tablet. "Consider it done, Ms. Green." Lawson, seated across from them, was equally focused. "I've already started drafting the lawsuit. We'll hit them from every angle. The police department, the store, even the individual officers involved." Samantha leaned back in her seat, her mind racing. This wasn't just about one incident in a luxury store. It was about dismantling the systems that allowed such incidents to occur in the first place. As the city skyline rolled by outside her window, Samantha allowed herself a small, grim smile. They had chosen the wrong woman to underestimate, and now they would face the consequences. The real work was just beginning, and Samantha Greene was more than ready for the fight. Back at the store, chaos reigned. Reporters swarmed the entrance, shouting questions at anyone who emerged. Inside, Officer Hayes sat on a plush ottoman, his head in his hands, as his fellow officers arrived to assess the situation. The store manager paced back and forth, barking orders into his phone. "I don't care what it costs. Get our PR team here now. And call corporate We need to get ahead of this before it spirals completely out of control." As the commotion continued, a young woman pushed her way through the crowd outside. She flashed a law student ID at the officers guarding the door and was allowed inside. Her eyes scanned the room until they landed on Officer Hayes. "Dad!" Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through the noise like a knife. Officer Hayes looked up, his face crumpling at the sight of his daughter. "Melissa, what are you doing here?" Melissa Hayes stood before her father, her expression a mix of disappointment and fury. "I saw the video, Dad. It's all over social media. How could you?" The realization that his actions had not only professional but deeply personal consequences seemed to hit Officer Hayes like a physical blow. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Melissa shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "Do you have any idea who that woman is? What she's done for civil rights? I interned at her firm last summer. She's a hero to so many people, and you treated her like a criminal." The revelation hit Officer Hayes hard. He had never known about his daughter's admiration for Samantha Greene, never bothered to ask about her internship or her passion for civil rights. In that moment, he realized just how much damage his actions had caused, not just to Samantha, not just to his career, but to his relationship with his own daughter. As the chaos of the aftermath continued to unfold around them, Officer Hayes sat in stunned silence, the full weight of his actions finally sinking in. The world as he knew it was crumbling, and he was only just beginning to understand the role he had played in its destruction. Outside, the media frenzy was reaching a fever pitch. The story of Samantha Greene, the tech CEO racially profiled in a luxury store, was spreading like wildfire across social media and news outlets. It was a spark that would soon ignite a much larger conversation about racial bias, privilege, and the insidious nature of systemic racism. And at the center of it all was Samantha Greene, a woman who had turned a moment of injustice into a catalyst for change. As her SUV wound its way through the city streets, she steeled herself for the battle ahead. This was just the beginning, and she was ready to see it through to the end. The video of Samantha Greene's confrontation with Officer Derek Hayes spread across social media platforms like wildfire, igniting a firestorm of public outrage. Within hours, the footage had been viewed millions of times, shared by celebrities, activists, and ordinary citizens alike. The hashtag #ShoppingWhileBlack trended worldwide, becoming a rallying cry for those who had experienced similar discrimination. Samantha sat in her office, her eyes fixed on the multiple screens before her, each displaying a different news channel. Her face stared back at her from every screen, accompanied by headlines that screamed injustice and demanded accountability. Tyler Brooks entered the room, his usual calm demeanor tinged with concern. "Ms. Greene, the press is clamoring for a statement. We've received interview requests from every major network." Samantha nodded, her gaze never leaving the screens. "Schedule a press conference for tomorrow morning. It's time we take control of this narrative." As Tyler left to make the arrangements, Samantha's phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from the police department informing her that Officer Hayes had been placed on immediate suspension, pending a full investigation. A grim smile played at the corners of her mouth. It was a start, but she knew it wasn't enough. This wasn't just about one officer or one incident. It was about dismantling a system that allowed such prejudices to flourish. Across town, Officer Derek Hayes sat at his kitchen table, staring blankly at the suspension notice before him. The weight of his actions pressed down on him like a physical force, crushing the air from his lungs. The shrill ring of his phone cut through the silence. He answered without checking the caller ID, his voice a hollow echo of its usual authority. "Hayes! Derek, have you lost your damn mind?" The voice of his captain crackled through the speaker, a mixture of fury and disbelief. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The entire department is under scrutiny because of your actions." Hayes opened his mouth to respond, to offer some justification, but the words died on his lips. What could he say? That he was just following procedure? That he had a hunch? Every excuse sounded hollow, even to his own ears. "I'm sorry, Captain," he managed to croak out. "Sorry doesn't cut it, Hayes," the captain snapped. "We're launching a full investigation into your past conduct. If we find any pattern of racial bias in your previous arrests or interactions, you're done. Do you understand me?" The call ended abruptly, leaving Hayes in stunned silence. He looked around his kitchen at the photos on the walls chronicling his career in law enforcement. 20 years of service, and for what? To have it all come crashing down because of one incident? But even as the thought formed, he knew it wasn't true. This wasn't just one incident. It was the culmination of a lifetime of unchecked biases, of assumptions made and actions taken without consideration for the consequences. The sound of a key in the lock jolted him from his reverie. His daughter, Melissa, walked in, her face a mask of barely contained emotion. "Dad," she said, her voice trembling, "we need to talk." Hayes nodded, gesturing for her to sit. Melissa remained standing, her body tense as if ready for flight. "I saw the video," she began, her words coming out in a rush. "How could you do that? Do you have any idea who that woman is?" Hayes shook his head, confusion etched on his face. "That was Samantha Greene," Melissa continued, her voice rising. "She's a pioneer in tech, a champion for civil rights. I interned at her company last summer, Dad. She's everything I aspire to be, and you treated her like a criminal." The revelation hit Hayes like a physical blow. He had never bothered to ask about Melissa's internship, had never shown interest in her passion for civil rights. And now, here he was, the very embodiment of everything she fought against. "Sweetheart, I didn't know," he began, but Melissa cut him off. "That's the problem, Dad. You didn't know because you didn't care to know. You saw a black woman in an expensive store and immediately assumed the worst. Do you have any idea how that makes me feel? How it makes Mom feel?" Hayes flinched at the mention of his ex-wife, a wound that had never fully healed. "I'm sorry," he said, the words feeling inadequate even as he spoke them. Melissa shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "Sorry isn't enough, Dad. Not this time." With that, she turned and left, the door closing behind her with a finality that echoed through the empty house. Meanwhile, at the headquarters of Greene Technologies, Samantha was preparing for her press conference. She stood before a mirror, adjusting her suit and steeling herself for the cameras. Tyler appeared at her side, his reflection joining hers in the mirror. "The vultures are circling," he said, a hint of dark humor in his voice. "Are you ready for this?" Samantha met his gaze in the mirror, her eyes blazing with determination. "I've been ready for this my entire life, Tyler. It's time to turn this moment into a movement." As they made their way to the conference room, Samantha's phone buzzed with a new notification. It was a message from an unexpected source, Melissa Hayes. "Ms. Greene," the message read, "I was an intern at your company last summer. I want you to know that I stand with you, and I'm deeply sorry for my father's actions. If there's anything I could do to help, please let me know." Samantha paused, her fingers hovering over the screen. After a moment's consideration, she typed out a reply. "Thank you, Melissa. Your support means more than you know. Let's talk soon." As she pocketed her phone, Samantha felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about all the Melissas out there, caught between the world they wanted to build and the prejudices that held them back. The press conference was a whirlwind of flashing cameras and shouted questions. Samantha stood at the podium, her voice steady as she addressed the room. "What happened to me is not an isolated incident," she began. "It's a symptom of a deeper, systemic problem that plagues our society. Racial profiling isn't just wrong, it's dangerous. It erodes trust, perpetuates stereotypes, and denies basic human dignity to people of color." As she spoke, her words were broadcast live across the nation. In living rooms and offices, on smartphones and tablets, people listened, captivated by her message. "But this isn't just about pointing fingers," Samantha continued. "It's about creating change, real, lasting change. And that starts with education, with confronting our biases, and with holding those in power accountable for their actions." In his kitchen, Officer Hayes watched the press conference, his face a mixture of shame and dawning realization. For the first time, he began to see the full impact of his actions, not just on Samantha Greene, but on countless others who had suffered similar indignities in silence. As Samantha concluded her speech, she made an announcement that sent shockwaves through the room. "Today, I'm launching the Green Initiative for Racial Equity. This foundation will work to combat racial profiling, promote diversity in corporate spaces, and provide legal support to victims of discrimination. The room erupted in applause, cameras flashing as reporters clamored for more details. Samantha stood firm at the podium, her presence commanding respect and attention. In the days that followed, the Green Initiative gained momentum at a staggering pace. Donations poured in from individuals and corporations alike, all eager to be part of the change. Samantha found herself at the center of a growing movement, her voice amplified beyond anything she had imagined. But even as she embraced her new role as an activist, Samantha couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The legal battles were important, the public awareness crucial, but she couldn't help but wonder about the man at the center of it all, Officer Derek Hayes. One evening, as she sat in her office reviewing proposals for the initiative, Samantha made a decision that would surprise even her closest advisors. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she had memorized from the police report. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times before a gruff voice answered. Hayes! Samantha took a deep breath. Officer Hayes, this is Samantha Greene. I think it's time we had a conversation. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Hayes spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Ms. Greene, I don't know what to say. Then don't say anything, Samantha replied. Just listen. I'm not calling to berate you or to demand an apology. I'm calling because I believe that real change requires understanding on both sides. Are you willing to have that conversation? Another pause, shorter this time. Yes, Hayes said, his voice stronger now. Yes, I am. As Samantha hung up the phone, she felt a shift in the air, a sense that something monumental was about to unfold. This wasn't just about one incident in a luxury store anymore. It was about bridging divides, challenging assumptions, and paving the way for a future where the color of one's skin didn't determine their worth or their welcome. The road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges. But for the first time since that fateful day in the store, Samantha felt a glimmer of hope. Change was coming, one conversation at a time. The conference room at Greene Technologies hummed with tension as Samantha Greene sat across from Officer Derek Hayes. The table between them seemed to stretch for miles, a chasm of misunderstanding and prejudice that had brought them to this moment. Samantha's fingers drummed a quiet rhythm on the polished wood. Officer Hayes, thank you for agreeing to meet with me. Hayes nodded, his eyes fixed on a point just over Samantha's shoulder. The weight of his actions hung heavy in the air, a palpable presence that threatened to suffocate them both. I'm not here to berate you, Samantha continued, her voice steady. I'm here because I believe that real change requires understanding on both sides. Can you tell me, in your own words, what happened that day in the store? Hayes shifted in his seat, his uniform suddenly feeling too tight. I received a call about suspicious activity. When I arrived, I saw you and I made assumptions. Based on what? Samantha pressed, leaning forward. Hayes' jaw clenched. Based on your race. I saw a black woman in an expensive store and I jumped to conclusions. The admission hung in the air between them, raw and uncomfortable. Samantha let the silence stretch, forcing Hayes to sit with the weight of his words. Do you know how many times I've been in that situation? Samantha finally asked. How many times I've been followed in stores, questioned about my presence in high-end spaces, made to feel like I don't belong? Hayes shook his head, unable to meet her gaze. Too many to count, Samantha said, her voice tinged with a lifetime of frustration. And each time, it chips away at you. It makes you question your worth, your place in the world. Can you imagine what that feels like? For the first time, Hayes looked directly at Samantha. The pain in her eyes was a mirror to his own shame. No, he said softly. I can't. Samantha nodded. That's the problem, Officer Hayes. You couldn't imagine it because you've never had to live it. But now, I'm asking you to try. As they continued to talk, the barriers between them began to crumble. Hayes spoke of his upbringing, of the subtle and not-so-subtle prejudices that had shaped his worldview. Samantha shared stories of her own struggles, of the obstacles she'd overcome to reach her position. Hours passed, and as the sun began to set outside the conference room windows, a shift occurred. The air between them felt lighter, charged with the possibility of change. "I can't undo what I did," Hayes said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I want to make it right. Not just with you, but with everyone I've wronged over the years." Samantha leaned back, studying Hayes' face. "It won't be easy. You'll face backlash, skepticism. People will question your motives." Hayes nodded. "I know, but I have to try. For my daughter, for myself, for the person I want to be." As they stood to leave, Samantha extended her hand. Hayes hesitated for a moment before taking it, the handshake a symbol of the bridge they had begun to build. Outside the conference room, Tyler Brooks waited, his face a mask of concern. "Everything okay, Ms. Greene?" Samantha nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Better than okay, Tyler. I think we've just taken the first step towards real change." In the weeks that followed, the Green Initiative for Racial Equity gained momentum. Samantha's story became a rallying cry for those fighting against systemic racism and discrimination. But it was the unexpected alliance between Samantha and Officer Hayes that truly captured the public's attention. Hayes, true to his word, began speaking out about his experiences. He underwent intensive sensitivity training and started working with advocacy groups to address racial bias in law enforcement. His journey from perpetrator to advocate was not without its challenges, but with each step, he felt the weight of his past actions lifting. One evening, as Hayes sat in his living room reviewing materials for an upcoming speaking engagement, his daughter Melissa walked in. The tension between them had been palpable since the incident, but tonight, something was different. "Dad," Melissa said, her voice soft. "I saw your interview on the news. I'm proud of you." Hayes looked up, his eyes glistening. "Thank you, sweetheart. That means more to me than you know." Melissa sat beside him, taking his hand in hers. "There's something I need to tell you. Something about Grandma." Hayes furrowed his brow. "What about her?" Melissa took a deep breath. "She was biracial, Dad. Her father was black." The revelation hit Hayes like a physical blow. Memories flooded back. His mother's evasiveness about her past, the strained relationship with his grandparents, the subtle comments from relatives. It all suddenly made sense. How long have you known?" Hayes asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Since last year," Melissa replied. "I found some old photos and letters when I was cleaning out the attic. I didn't know how to tell you." Hayes sat back, his mind reeling. All these years, he had carried these prejudices, never knowing that the very blood that ran through his veins connected him to the people he had discriminated against. The next day, Hayes reached out to Samantha, sharing this newfound piece of his identity. Samantha listened, offering support and understanding. Together, they decided to incorporate this revelation into their ongoing work with the Green Initiative. As the months passed, the initiative's impact grew. Legislation was introduced to combat racial profiling. Diversity programs were implemented in corporations across the country, and a national conversation about systemic racism gained traction. 1 year to the day after the incident in the luxury store, Samantha stood on a stage before a packed auditorium. The crowd was a sea of faces from all walks of life, united in their commitment to change. "A year ago," Samantha began, her voice strong and clear, "I was just another black woman being profiled in a store. Today, I stand before you as a testament to the power of resilience, of confronting our biases, and of the human capacity for change." She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on a familiar face. Melissa Hayes sat in the front row, her eyes shining with admiration. "Justice isn't just about winning court cases or changing laws," Samantha continued. "It's about changing hearts and minds. It's about teaching the world to see the truth, even when it's hard." As she spoke, a figure emerged from backstage. Officer Derek Hayes, no longer in uniform but standing tall, joined Samantha at the podium. "I stand here today not as the man I was, but as the man I'm striving to become," Hayes said, his voice carrying across the hushed auditorium. "My journey of self-discovery and redemption is far from over, but I'm committed to being part of the solution." The audience erupted in applause, a standing ovation that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. Samantha and Hayes stood side by side, a living embodiment of the change they were working to create. As the applause died down, Samantha stepped forward one last time. "This is just the beginning," she said, her voice filled with determination. "We have a long road ahead of us, but together, we can build a world where no one is judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." The crowd rose to their feet once more, the energy in the room electric with possibility. Samantha looked out over the sea of faces, her heart swelling with hope. She caught Melissa's eye in the front row and smiled, knowing that the young woman represented the future they were all fighting for. As Samantha left the stage, arm in arm with Hayes, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. The incident in the store had been a catalyst, a painful but necessary spark that had ignited a movement. And while there was still much work to be done, Samantha knew that they had taken the first crucial steps towards a more just and equitable world. Outside the auditorium, reporters clamored for interviews, cameras flashed, and supporters cheered. But for Samantha, the real victory was in the quiet moments, the changed minds, the open hearts, the bridges built between people who once saw each other as adversaries. As she stepped into the waiting car, Samantha caught a glimpse of her reflection in the window. The woman staring back at her was no longer just a victim of racial profiling. She was a leader, a change maker, a beacon of hope for those still fighting to be seen and heard. The car pulled away from the curb, carrying Samantha towards a future that, while uncertain, held the promise of real, lasting change. And as the city lights blurred past the window, Samantha allowed herself a moment of quiet celebration. They had taken the first steps on a long journey, but with each passing day, the destination grew clearer. A world where justice and equality were not just ideals, but realities. The story of Samantha Greene and Officer Derek Hayes would be told for years to come, a testament to the power of confronting one's biases, of reaching across divides, and of the transformative nature of understanding and empathy. It was a story that would inspire generations, reminding them that even in the darkest moments, there is always hope for change, for growth, and for a better tomorrow.